Captain Alaramir paced the command deck of the Veiler, her sleek form cutting through the soft hum of the ship's operations. Her second-in-command, Commander Tyrol Sen, watched her with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Captain, you've been circling the same spot for the past 10 minutes. What's on your mind?" Tyrol asked, his deep voice breaking the monotonous whispers of the control panels. Alara stopped and turned towards him, her eyes reflecting the starlight from the viewport. "We've received new orders, Tyrol. We're being redirected from our charted course." Tyrol raised an eyebrow, stepping closer to the holographic map that dominated the center of the room. "Redirected? To where? I thought our mission was clear for the next several cycles." Alara tapped on her datapad, bringing up the coordinates and official orders. The screen flickered to life, displaying a rotating hologram of a lush blue and green planet. "Our new destination," she said, handing him the pad. He took it, his eyes scanning the text quickly. "Earth? That's highly unusual. Isn't that sector marked as highly volatile?" "Yes, it's Earth. And yes, it's considered one of the most unpredictable areas in the galaxy. That's exactly why the Galactic Peace Corps wants us there. There's something about this mission that's not standard protocol," Alara explained, her voice tinged with unease. At that moment, their chief scientist, Dr. Morokale, joined them. "Did I hear correctly? We're going to Earth?" he asked, adjusting his glasses. His curiosity was piqued, evident from his quickened speech. There's so much we could learn from their ecosystems and technological discrepancies. Tyrol handed him the datapad. "It's not a scientific expedition, Miro. There's potential for real danger." The last reconnaissance team reported aggressive behavior from the local species. Dr. Kale's excitement didn't wane. Aggression or not, the chance to observe such a unique civilization is incredibly rare. We should prepare for every possible interaction. Alara nodded, appreciating his enthusiasm but tempered by the weight of command. "Prepare we will, but our primary goal is to escort the diplomatic envoy safely to and from the planet. Anything beyond that is secondary." "What do we know about the envoy?" Tyrol inquired, crossing his arms. "Not much. They're arriving tomorrow and we'll brief them en route. For now, our job is to make sure the Veiler is ready for any situation." Alara's voice carried a commanding tone that left no room for argument. The three of them spent the next few hours discussing logistics, potential diplomatic strategies, and the specifics of Earth's geopolitical landscape. As they delved deeper into the preparations, the reality of their mission began to set in. Earth was not just another stop on their map. It was a world that could prove to be as dangerous as it was enchanting. "All right, team," Alara concluded. "Let's ensure we're prepared for anything. Earth is known for its unpredictability, and we need to be at our best. Tyrol, coordinate with the defense team. Moreau, start putting together environmental briefs and any cultural data we have. We need to understand them as much as they need to understand us." As her crew dispersed to carry out her orders, Alara stayed behind, looking out at the stars. Earth, with all its mysteries and dangers, awaited them, and she felt the weight of the unknown pressing down upon her shoulders. Yet there was no turning back now. The journey ahead would test them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Chapter 2. The Earth Briefing. The ship's briefing room buzzed with subdued chatter as the crew gathered. Captain Alaramir and Commander Tyrol Sen stood at the front, ready to present the mission details. Dr. Morokale was already poring over a data slate, his eyes scanning the fine print. "All right, everyone," Alara began, holding a commanding presence at the center of the room. "Before we land, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Commander Sen will go over the initial protocols. After that, Dr. Kale will present the data we've managed to gather about the planet." Tyrol nodded, stepping forward. "Earth is a unique case. It's one of the few planets still largely controlled by a single native species, humans. They've achieved moderate technological advancement, but their societal structures are fragmented. Governments operate independently and often in competition with one another. That alone makes negotiations difficult." A low murmur ran through the room. One of the crew members raised a hand. But Commander, if they're that divided, won't that make our mission easier? We just have to appeal to one faction, right? Tyrol shook his head. It's not that simple. Humans are unpredictable. They have a long history of intergroup conflicts. Convincing them to act in unison is one of the main challenges we'll face. Dr. Kale chimed in, his voice more animated than usual. That's only the surface of the issue. Earth is teeming with diverse ecosystems. Jungles, deserts, oceans, mountain ranges. Each home to species found nowhere else in the galaxy. The environmental variability means we'll need to be prepared for sudden weather changes, unpredictable terrain, and wildlife that could be hostile. In some regions, the creatures are as dangerous as the humans. Alara added, and that's why we need a plan. This mission isn't just about delivering the envoy. It's about navigating a world that operates on a completely different set of rules. That means cooperation and communication will be key. Tyrol and I will coordinate field operations, but we'll rely on all of you for quick thinking and adaptability. Tyrol turned to the holographic display that now showed a rotating image of Earth. He gestured toward the screen. Dr. Kale, can you give us a quick rundown of the regions we're likely to encounter first? Kale stepped forward. We're landing on the northern continent, specifically in a forested area away from major population centers. Initial scans show heavy tree cover and a moderate climate. However, weather patterns in this region shift quickly. Storms can arise within hours. If that happens, we'll need to either shelter in place or move to higher ground. One of the engineers, Rin Veeler, raised his hand. Will we need environmental suits? How breathable is their atmosphere? It's breathable for us, Kale replied. But there's more oxygen than you might be used to. Some of you may feel more energetic or even lightheaded at first. The gravity is slightly stronger as well, so it might take a few hours to adjust. Another crew member chimed in. And what about the humans? Are they going to see us as a threat? Alara answered this time. That depends on our approach. The goal is to remain low profile, at least at first. We'll establish contact only after the envoy gives us the green light. Until then, no unauthorized interactions with the local population. Understood. A chorus of affirmations followed. Tyrol crossed his arms, glancing around the room. I don't need to tell you all that this is uncharted territory for most of us. But if we stay alert and work together, we can accomplish this mission without incident. Alara turned back to the crew, her tone firm but calm. We've trained for situations like this, and I trust each one of you to do your part. As long as we remain disciplined and mindful of the protocols, we'll return safely. Dr. Kale, anything else they should know before we begin final preparations? Kale glanced at his notes before addressing the group. Just one thing. Never underestimate this planet. From what we've observed, its ecosystems and inhabitants have a way of surprising even the most seasoned explorers. So stay alert, follow orders, and keep your comms open at all times. Alara nodded. Thank you, Dr. Kale. All right, everyone, you've heard the briefing. Make sure your equipment is in top condition and report any issues immediately. Tyrol and I will be on the command deck if you need us. Dismissed. As the crew filed out, Tyrol turned to Alara. They seem confident, but I can tell a few are nervous. Do you think we're ready for this? We have to be, Alara said. This isn't a mission we can fail. Earth may be unpredictable, but so are we. We'll adapt, like we always do. Tyrol gave a slight grin. Well, I suppose we're about to find out. Let's hope the envoy knows what they're walking into. Alara looked back at the planet rotating on the screen. I hope so too, Tyrol. For all our sakes. Chapter 3, Entering the Atmosphere. The command deck was tense as the Veiler approached Earth's orbit. The planet grew larger on the screen with each passing moment, its vibrant swirls of blue and green interlaced with streaks of white cloud cover. Captain Alara Mir stood at her station, watching the instruments closely. Commander Tyrol Sen stood beside her, scanning readouts on his handheld device. We're entering the planet's gravity well, announced Lieutenant Lura, the ship's navigator. Her voice was steady, but the slight tremor in her hands betrayed her nerves. Alara turned to her crew. Stay sharp, everyone. Earth's atmosphere is dense, and their satellites could pose a challenge if we don't follow the optimal entry path. Tyrol glanced over at her. The data suggests we'll be landing in a forested region, far from human settlements. Do you think we'll encounter any surprises? Alara gave him a thin smile. This entire mission is a surprise, Tyrol. Let's just hope the terrain is the only challenge we face. She looked over at Dr. Morocale, who was seated at the science station. Dr. Kale, are we ready for the environmental transition? Kale nodded without looking up from his console. Conditions are stable. Atmospheric pressure is within acceptable limits, and oxygen levels are higher than we're accustomed to, but manageable. However, I'd advise the crew to proceed cautiously. This environment is still relatively unknown to us. The ship shuddered slightly as it dipped into the upper atmosphere. Alara gripped the edge of her console. Everyone, brace yourselves. We'll hit turbulence as we pass through the thermosphere. The Veiler trembled again, a series of vibrations rattling through the hull. The display showed their trajectory as a glowing arc descending toward the surface. Tyrol leaned closer to Alara, his voice low. It's strange, isn't it? All this effort just to land on one planet. Alara nodded, keeping her eyes on the readings. It's not just any planet. Earth has been a mystery for centuries. If this mission can shed some light on it, then the effort will be worth it. The ship jolted, and several crew members grabbed onto their consoles for support. Kale frowned at his instruments. Electromagnetic interference. It must be from the planet's magnetosphere. I'll make adjustments to the stabilizers. Do it, Alara ordered. Tyrol, monitor the descent speed. I don't want us coming in too hot. Aye, Captain, Tyrol said, his hands moving quickly over his device, adjusting descent angle. We're looking good so far. The turbulence eased as they broke through the denser layers of the atmosphere. Below them, a patchwork of lush green forests came into view, stretching as far as the eye could see. Streams glinted like silver threads, and the sun reflected off the surface of a distant lake. It was beautiful yet wild and untamed. Prepare for landing, Alara instructed. Lura, take us down slowly. Tyrol, deploy the landing struts as soon as we reach 50 meters. The ship descended gradually, its engines humming softly as it neared the ground. Tyrol checked his readouts one final time before issuing the command. Landing struts deployed. We're steady. The Veiler settled onto a small clearing, the undergrowth swaying gently from the force of the landing thrusters. Alara exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. We're here. Good work, everyone. Tyrol set up the perimeter sensors. Dr. Kale, begin atmospheric sampling. As the crew moved to their tasks, Alara and Tyrol stepped out onto the gangway. The air was crisp and filled with the sense of earth and greenery. Tyrol crouched to examine the soil, running it through his fingers. The texture's coarser than what we have on most of the colonies, he said. Alara knelt beside him. And the smell. There's a richness to it. It's different from anything I've encountered. Kale joined them, holding a small handheld scanner. So far, everything appears stable. The oxygen levels are higher, as expected. But there's something else. Readings indicate a complex mix of microorganisms. It's more diverse than what we've seen on most planets. Tyrol rose to his feet, looking around the clearing. If we're going to be here for a while, we should establish a base camp. We can't rely solely on the ship's resources. Alara agreed. We'll need shelter, water, and a secure perimeter. Tyrol, take a team and start setting up the modular structures. Dr. Kale, continue gathering environmental data. We'll need a full analysis before nightfall. Tyrol nodded, already moving to gather supplies. I'll start with the main habitat unit and work outward. Shouldn't take more than a couple of hours. Alara watched him go, feeling a measure of reassurance in his competence. She turned to Kale, who was still engrossed in his readings. Dr. Kale, keep me updated. If anything seems off, I need to know immediately. Understood, Captain, he replied, his focus never wavering from his scanner. As the crew worked together, the forest around them buzzed with unfamiliar sounds. Chirps, rustles, and distant calls that hinted at the vast biodiversity hidden in the trees. Alara couldn't help but feel a mix of trepidation and curiosity. Earth was unlike any world she had encountered before, and the challenges ahead were still unknown. But with Tyrol and the rest of her crew by her side, she was determined to see this mission through. Chapter 4: Learning from Each Other. The camp came together piece by piece under Tyrol's direction. A semi-permanent structure emerged from modular panels and reinforced struts, blending into the forest's edge. Alara stood back to admire the progress. Tyrol worked tirelessly with a handful of crew members, his determination infectious. He paused only when Alara approached, hands on her hips, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Looks like it's finally coming together," she said. Tyrol straightened, brushing dirt from his palms. "Not bad for a day's work. Should keep us sheltered and secure for now." Alara glanced at the clearing. Portable lights cast a soft glow as the sun dipped below the horizon. "This spot. Did you pick it for any particular reason?" Tyrol gestured around them. "It's defensible. Dense trees on 3 sides, open enough to monitor movement, and there's a freshwater stream nearby. Plus, it's far enough from human settlements to avoid accidental contact." "And the wildlife?" she asked. "Relatively calm here. We've seen signs of small animals, nothing that seems territorial or overly aggressive." Kale's still analyzing, but so far no surprises. Alara tilted her head. "Let's hope it stays that way." As they spoke, Dr. Kale emerged from the camp's makeshift lab, clutching his ever-present scanner. "Captain, Commander," he began, "I have some preliminary data on the local ecosystem." Tyrol groaned. "Kale, it's been a long day. How about we hear the summary?" Kale adjusted his glasses, unperturbed. "In short, the biosphere here is incredibly diverse. Oxygen levels remain stable, and the microorganism population in the soil is unlike anything we've encountered elsewhere. The flora seems well adapted to the varying climate conditions, and the fauna is highly specialized." Alara folded her arms. "What does that mean for us, Dr. Kale?" "Nothing alarming," he assured her. "But it does mean we need to stay vigilant. The interconnectedness of the ecosystem suggests that any disruption, us, for instance, might have unpredictable effects." Tyrol gave a half-smile. "That's the summarized version?" Kale smiled faintly. "I spared you the full data set." Alara held back a laugh. "Thank you, Dr. Kale. Keep monitoring. If anything changes, I want to know." Kale nodded and returned to his equipment. Alara turned to Tyrol, who was already scanning the perimeter. "He's thorough. I'll give him that," Tyrol muttered. "Thorough is what keeps us safe," Alara said, following his gaze. The forest beyond the camp was alive with faint noises. Chirps, rustles, the occasional snap of a branch. "But I'll admit, I'm glad we have you here to keep everything running smoothly." "Just doing my job, Captain," Tyrol replied. "But I have to say, it's a strange feeling being this far out, on a world most of the galaxy considers too dangerous to visit." She nodded. "It is strange. And yet, look around. It's beautiful. A place so full of life. It almost feels untamed." "Untamed is a good word for it," Tyrol agreed. "But that's what makes it worth studying. Figuring out how all this works, why it evolved the way it did. That's the part one actually enjoy." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the forest grow darker as night set in. Then Alara spoke. "What about you, Tyrol? Ever imagine yourself in a place like this, doing this kind of work?" Tyrol shrugged. "Not really. I always thought I'd end up stationed near the home colonies, keeping the peace on settled worlds. But here we are. I guess that's what makes this job interesting. No 2 days are the same." Alara smiled. "I'm glad you're here, Tyrol. This isn't the kind of mission I can handle alone." "None of us are alone," he replied simply. She nodded, appreciating the sentiment. "Let's finish up here for tonight. Tomorrow, we'll start exploring the surrounding area. See what else this planet has to show us. Tyrol gave a short nod and resumed his work, while Alara lingered a moment longer. The forest seemed to hum with life, a complex symphony of creatures and plants, all interconnected in ways she could barely comprehend. She took a deep breath and turned back toward the camp. There was still much to learn, and she knew they would only begin to understand this place if they worked together. Chapter 5. Exploring Earth Together. Morning broke with a subtle glow filtering through the canopy. Alara stepped out of the base's main shelter, stretching as the fresh, earthy air greeted her. Tyrol was already up, crouched by the perimeter fence, making adjustments to the motion sensors. "You're up early," Alara called over, heading his way. He glanced back, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "Not much of a sleeper. Figured I'd make sure these were still calibrated before we head out." Alara crouched down beside him, observing his work. "I'm glad you're as meticulous as Kale is, just in a different way." Tyrol chuckled softly. "Kale would be offended if he heard you compare our methods. But, thanks. If something wanders too close while we're exploring, I want to know before it's breathing down our necks." Satisfied with his adjustments, Tyrol stood and dusted off his hands. "All right, what's the plan for today, Captain?" "We'll take a small team to explore the nearby ridge," Alara replied. "Kale says the region's plant life shows unusual biosignatures. If we can figure out why, it might help us understand how life on this planet evolved." Tyrol raised an eyebrow. "You sure Kale just doesn't want an excuse to catalog more alien weeds?" Alara laughed. "He does love his data, but he's not wrong about the ridge. I want you to come along, Tyrol. A second pair of eyes out there will help." "Count me in," he said. "I'll grab some gear." They set off with a small team, Kale in tow, his portable scanner slung across his back. The path took them through the dense forest, where sunlight dappled the ground in shifting patterns. The air was alive with the calls of unseen creatures, creating an eerie yet captivating soundtrack. Alara glanced at Tyrol as they walked. "How do you feel about this place so far?" He shrugged. "It's different. Feels raw, I guess. Every step we take, we're probably the first off-worlders to see it." "That's humbling, in a way." "It is," Alara agreed. "And unpredictable. That's why I'm glad you're here. You see things I might miss." Tyrol smiled faintly. "And you handle the big picture. Makes us a good team." Kale cleared his throat behind them. "As touching as this exchange is, we're getting close to the ridge. Readings indicate a strong magnetic field nearby. Could be natural, or it could be something else." Tyrol shot Alara a glance. "Something else. That's always comforting." They climbed the slope until the forest opened onto a ridge. The view took their breath away. Rolling hills stretched to the horizon, blanketed in thick vegetation. In the distance, a glint of water marked a large river cutting through the wilderness. "Kale, is the magnetic field coming from this area?" Alara asked, shielding her eyes from the sunlight. Kale adjusted his scanner and pointed to a rocky outcrop just ahead. "It's strongest over there. I'd guess some mineral deposit is responsible, but I'll need to get closer." The group approached the outcrop, cautious of loose stones and shifting ground. Tyrol took the lead, testing each step before moving forward. "If it's minerals, what kind are we talking about?" Kale's tone grew more animated. "Hard to say without a full analysis. The scanner suggests it's not anything common. Could be something unique to Earth's geology." Tyrol gave a low whistle. "So, a geologist's dream, huh?" "Exactly," Kale said, kneeling beside a cluster of jagged rocks. He set his scanner down, its lights flickering as it gathered data. "Let me work for a few minutes. I need to get clean readings." Alara and Tyrol took the opportunity to survey the area. Tyrol pointed to a dense patch of foliage at the ridge's edge. "You see that? Looks like a trail." Alara nodded. "Could be an animal path. Or something more recent," Tyrol suggested. "Want me to check it out?" "Not alone," she replied. "Let's go together." They moved carefully along the trail, the ground soft beneath their boots. It led them to a small clearing where the remains of a wooden structure stood. Most of it had collapsed into decay, but the framework was still visible. "What do you think it is?" Alara asked, stepping closer. Tyrol inspected the wood. "Old, that's for sure. Could be some kind of human outpost, maybe from decades ago. Weird that it's all the way out here, though." Alara looked around, her hand resting on her sidearm. "Keep your guard up. If it's recent, there could still be someone nearby." Tyrol nodded, scanning the treeline. "No movement, no sounds out of place. I think we're alone." Kale's voice crackled through their communicators. "I'm done with the scans. You should come back and see this." They returned to Kale, who held up a small sample vial. "This rock contains a rare magnetic isotope I've never seen before. It could have all kinds of properties we don't yet understand." Tyrol raised an eyebrow. "You mean it could be valuable?" "Potentially," Kale said. "More important, it might explain some of Earth's unique environmental conditions." Alara gestured to the sample. "Good work, Kale. We'll bring it back to the ship for further analysis." As they began the trek back to camp, Alara walked alongside Tyrol. "What do you make of that old structure we found?" He shrugged. "Hard to say. Might just be an old hunting lodge or research cabin. Still, it's odd to find it out here. Makes me wonder how much of Earth's history we don't know." Alara smiled. "That's why we're here, Tyrol. To learn, to understand. Even if it means uncovering things we didn't expect." Tyrol glanced at her. "Well, if that's the plan, then I guess I'm on board. Besides, it's not every day you get to explore a world like this." They continued their walk, the forest slowly reclaiming the trail behind them. Each step brought them closer to understanding Earth's mysteries, and they knew there was still so much more to discover together. Chapter 6. A Peaceful Mission in Peril. The camp was calm as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows through the forest. Tyrol stood near the perimeter fence, double-checking the motion sensors one last time. He glanced up as Alara approached, her pace brisk and her expression tense. "What's going on?" Tyrol asked, setting down the maintenance kit he'd been using. Alara stopped next to him. "We've picked up an unidentified signal not far from here. It's faint, but it's coming from the direction of that old structure we found yesterday." Tyrol raised an eyebrow. "You think someone's out there?" "I don't know," she admitted. "It might just be old equipment that's still functioning, or it could be something more recent. Either way, we can't ignore it," Tyrol said, rising to his feet. "What's the plan?" Alara hesitated, weighing her options. "Kale is running the signal through the ship's analysis suite to see if we can identify it. In the meantime, I want you and me to head out and take a closer look. I don't want the entire camp stirred up until we know what we're dealing with." Tyrol nodded. "Just the two of us? Sounds good. Let me grab my gear." Minutes later, they were making their way back toward the ridge. The forest seemed quieter than before, the usual chirps and rustles muted. Tyrol kept his voice low as they walked. "If it's old equipment, it shouldn't be giving off a signal that clear. And if it's new, we might have company." "Exactly," Alara replied. "That's why we need to move carefully. I don't want to risk a confrontation." As they approached the clearing with the crumbling structure, they slowed their pace. Alara gestured for Tyrol to spread out to the left while she took the right. They moved silently, scanning the area with handheld sensors. The signal grew stronger, and Tyrol caught sight of a faint red light blinking inside the ruins. "I've got something," he whispered over the comm. Alara came up alongside him, her eyes narrowing as she spotted the light. "Looks like a distress beacon," she said. "But it's not one of ours." Tyrol frowned. "Could it be human?" "Unlikely," she said. "This model doesn't match anything I've seen from Earth's archives. And it's not a standard galactic issue either." They crept closer, Tyrol taking point as he examined the beacon. It was embedded in a chunk of metal that didn't seem to belong to the rest of the structure. He ran his hand over it, feeling the smooth surface. "This material, it's not local. Could be alien tech." Alara nodded. "Let's document it. Kale will want a detailed analysis." Before they could begin, a sharp crack echoed from the forest behind them. Both froze, hands instinctively moving to their sidearms. Tyrole's voice was barely above a whisper. That wasn't us. Alara scanned the treeline. Stay sharp. We might not be alone. Another sound followed. A rustling of underbrush, slow and deliberate. Tyrole stepped in front of Alara, his gaze fixed on the direction of the noise. If someone's out there, they're trying to stay hidden. Alara activated her comm, Kale. We've got movement near the ridge. Can you triangulate the signal source? Kale's voice crackled in her ear. I'm trying, but the interference is stronger than I expected. It might take a few more minutes. Understood, she replied. Stay on it. Tyrole crouched lower, motioning for Alara to do the same. We can't wait here forever. Do we move closer or fall back? Alara considered their options. If we retreat now, we might lose the chance to find out what this is. Let's stay low and approach carefully. If it's nothing, we head back to camp. If it's something, we'll figure it out. They advanced slowly, the beacon's blinking light growing brighter. The noises in the forest faded, replaced by the soft hum of the device. Tyrole examined it again, this time removing a small scanner from his pack. I'm picking up a signal now. It's broadcasting on a frequency I've never seen before. Alara leaned closer, her eyes scanning the readout. This doesn't match anything from the galactic network. Could it be a new faction? Possibly, Tyrole said. But why would they leave a beacon out here? And why here, of all places? Before she could respond, a voice called out from the trees. Don't move. They turned quickly, spotting a figure emerging from the shadows. The person, human by the look of them, held a makeshift weapon, their face partially obscured by a hood. Who are you? The stranger demanded. Alara kept her hands visible. We're peaceful explorers. We don't mean any harm. The figure stepped closer, their weapon aimed steadily. Explorers? I don't think so. You're not from around here. Tyrole stayed calm, his voice steady. You're right, we're not. But we're not here to fight. What's your name? The person hesitated before replying. Leah, and you're trespassing on dangerous ground. You need to leave. We're not looking for trouble, Leah, Alara said. We found this beacon. Do you know where it came from? Leah's eyes darted to the device. It shouldn't even be active. I deactivated it months ago. Then it's reactivated itself, Tyrole said, holding up the scanner. Do you know who made it? Leah shook her head. I don't know who built it. I only know it's a warning. If it's on, that means they might come back. Alara and Tyrole exchanged a glance. Who might come back? Alara asked carefully. Leah hesitated again, lowering her weapon slightly. I can't say for sure, but if you value your safety, you'll leave before they get here. Leah, Tyrole said gently. If we leave now, we won't understand what we're dealing with. Maybe we can help you. She looked at them both, the tension in her posture slowly easing. If you really want to help, then don't stay long. This planet isn't as empty as it seems. Alara nodded. We'll take that under advisement. But we need to know more. Will you talk to us? Leah hesitated, then gave a reluctant nod. All right, but not here. Let's move away from the beacon. If it's drawing attention, we don't want to be nearby when it happens. The three of them moved carefully back toward the ridge, leaving the blinking light behind. They knew that whatever was coming, they had to be ready. Chapter 7. The Touch of Understanding. The camp had taken on a different air since Leah's arrival. Though she remained cautious, she had softened enough to sit around the small electric stove that served as their communal hearth. Tyrole pored over the scans of the beacon and the surrounding area, his brow furrowed in thought, while Leah offered occasional, clipped comments. So, let me get this straight, Tyrole said, adjusting his seat to face her. You don't know who built the beacon, but you think it's sending a signal to, warn someone? Or call someone back? Leah hesitated, her arms crossed over her chest. I said I'm not sure. All I know is that I found it after the last big storm, half buried in the mud. I tried to disable it, but the thing seems to repair itself. Alara, seated next to Tyrol, leaned forward. Did you notice any changes after you turned it off the first time? Any unusual activity in the area? Not right away, Leah admitted, staring into the flickering light of the stove. But over the months, there were a few odd things. Equipment going missing. Tracks I couldn't identify. I figured it might be local wildlife at first, but now. Tyrol raised an eyebrow. Now you think it's something else. She didn't respond immediately. Her gaze locked on the floor. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter. I'm not crazy. I know what normal looks like out here. This wasn't normal. Alara exchanged a glance with Tyrol. He set down the scanner and rubbed the back of his neck. All right, let's think this through. The beacon could be malfunctioning, but if it's attracting something, then we need to find out who or what that is. And why it's here, Alara added. She looked directly at Leah. Do you have any idea why someone would place a beacon in such a remote location? Leah shook her head. Your guess is as good as mine. This part of the forest isn't exactly easy to get to. But that's why I stayed. Less chance of anyone finding me. Tyrol tilted his head. Finding you? So you're hiding from someone? Leah's jaw tightened, but she didn't elaborate. Instead, she rose from her seat. I need some air. Alara watched her walk toward the edge of the clearing. Tyrol's voice broke the silence. She's definitely holding something back. She doesn't trust us yet, Alara said. I don't blame her. If I were stranded here, surrounded by unknowns, I'd be wary too. Fair, Tyrol agreed. But we need more to go on. If she knows something about this beacon, we can't afford to leave it unexplored. Alara stood, stretching her arms. I'll talk to her. Maybe I can get her to open up. Tyrol glanced at the scanner again. I'll keep working on this. If we can figure out the signal's origin, it might give us some answers without her having to say a word. Alara nodded and made her way toward Leah. The woman stood at the edge of the clearing, arms wrapped around herself as she stared out into the forest. The faint glow of the perimeter lights cast her silhouette in sharp relief. Leah, Alara said gently, stopping a few feet behind her. You're not used to having other people around, are you? No, Leah replied without turning. And it's not a bad thing. Alara stepped closer, lowering her voice. Sometimes it helps, though, when you're trying to figure something out, having someone else there. Someone who can see the things you might miss. It can make all the difference. Leah turned her head slightly, glancing at Alara. You think you're that someone? Alara met her gaze evenly. I don't know yet, but I'd like to help. And Tyrol. He's good at figuring things out, even when it's messy. Leah exhaled slowly, her shoulders easing just a bit. You two seem to work well together. We've been through a lot, Alara said. He's got a sharp mind and he's dependable. I wouldn't have made it this far without him. Leah's lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smile. You trust him. With my life, Alara said simply. Leah turned back toward the forest. That must be nice. Alara stepped beside her, resting her hands on her hips. It's not always easy, but trust grows over time, just like understanding. Leah looked down at her hands. I'm not used to relying on anyone. People let you down. Alara thought of all the times she and Tyrol had clashed over the years. Disagreements, misunderstandings, moments when their trust had been tested. People aren't perfect, she said. But if you give the right ones a chance, they can surprise you. Leah didn't respond right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer. I guess I just don't know who the right ones are. Alara placed a hand on Leah's shoulder, a small gesture of reassurance. That's something you figure out over time. You don't have to decide now. Leah looked at her, the guarded expression on her face softening ever so slightly. Maybe. For the first time, Alara saw the potential for trust in Leah's eyes. It was a start, small but significant. She knew that building a connection wouldn't happen overnight, but she also knew that every small step forward mattered. Back at the camp, Tyrol was still studying the scanner, his focus unwavering. When Alara returned, he looked up and raised an eyebrow. Anything? She's thinking it over, Alara said. She needs time, but I think she'll come around. Tyrol smiled faintly. I hope so, because if we're going to figure out what's really going on, we need her on board. Alara sat down beside him, letting out a long breath. We'll get there, one step at a time. And so they continued their work, side by side, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Chapter 8. A New Dawn for Earth and the Galaxy. As the sun rose over the forest canopy, casting a golden glow on the camp, the atmosphere inside the main shelter was heavy with anticipation. Alara, Tyrol, Leah, and Dr. Kale stood around the central display, where the final analysis of the beacon's signal pulsed in rhythmic waves. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the ship's systems and the occasional beep from the scanner. So, this is it? Tyrol asked, breaking the tension. He leaned forward, his palms flat on the console. We finally know where it's coming from? Dr. Kale nodded. It's faint, but the source has been triangulated. It's emanating from a remote site several kilometers east of here. Judging by the terrain and the energy readings, I'd say it's either a hidden facility or a natural phenomenon channeling alien technology. Leah crossed her arms. If it's what I think it is, it's not natural. That beacon was placed intentionally, and whoever put it there must have had a reason. Alara tapped the console, magnifying the map of the area. We need to see this for ourselves. Kale, you'll stay here and keep monitoring the signal. Tyrol, Leah, and I will investigate the site. We'll move carefully, but we need answers. Tyrol nodded, his expression serious. Sounds good to me. Let's gear up and head out. As they prepared, Alara caught Tyrol's eye. He gave her a brief nod, and she knew he was ready for whatever they might find. Leah, though still guarded, seemed more willing to cooperate. Her knowledge of the forest and the terrain would be invaluable. The trio set out just after dawn, with Tyrol leading the way. Leah followed closely, her keen eyes scanning the surroundings. Alara took up the rear, keeping her communicator open in case Kale needed to relay information. The forest felt more alive than ever. Birds darted through the trees, and small mammals skittered in the underbrush. Yet, an undercurrent of tension hung in the air. You're sure this is the right direction? Tyrol asked, glancing over his shoulder at Leah. She nodded. The terrain matches the map. If we keep heading east, we'll find it. After an hour of careful travel, the forest opened into a wide clearing. In the center stood what could only be described as a massive metallic structure, half buried in the earth. Its surface was smooth and dark, with faint lines that pulsed rhythmically like veins under the skin. The beacon's signal emanated from its core, a steady, otherworldly hum that set the hairs on Alara's neck on edge. Now that's something you don't see every day, Tyrol muttered, stepping closer. Stop, Leah said sharply, reaching out to grab his arm. You don't know what it'll do if you get too close. Tyrol stopped, holding his hands up. All right, I'm just trying to get a better look. Alara stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. Leah's right. We proceed carefully. We don't know if it's active or if approaching it could trigger some kind of defense mechanism. Leah gestured to the faintly glowing lines on the structure. It wasn't doing that before. It's more alive now. Alara exchanged a glance with Tyrol. Could be our presence is enough to wake it up. Well, isn't that comforting? Tyrol replied with a wry smile. Let's take a closer look, Alara said. Leah, you're with me. Tyrol, keep watch from here. If anything changes, call it out immediately. As Alara and Leah approached, the hum grew louder. The structure towered over them, its surface strangely warm to the touch. Leah hesitated, her hand hovering over the wall. You don't have to touch it, Alara said softly. We just need to see what's inside. Leah lowered her hand and stepped back. I don't think we can get inside. There's no obvious entry point. Alara ran her fingers along one of the glowing lines. It feels more like a shell, something protecting what's inside. If this is alien technology, it might respond to certain frequencies or signals. Kale might have the tools we need to open it. Suddenly, the hum changed pitch, rising to a higher frequency. Tyrol called out from his vantage point. Something's happening. The lines are getting brighter. Lia moved closer to Ilara, her voice tense. What's it doing? I don't know, Ilara admitted, backing away from the structure. Tyrol, can you see any external changes? No movement, Tyrol replied, but it's definitely more active. We might want to get out of here before it does something we can't handle. Before Ilara could respond, the structure emitted a low, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through the ground. The air around them shimmered, and for a moment, it felt as though the entire clearing held its breath. Let's go, Ilara ordered. We've seen enough. We need to get back to camp and analyze this further. The group retreated quickly, Tyrol keeping an eye on their flank. The forest seemed eerily silent now, as if the wildlife had sensed the disturbance and gone into hiding. When they returned to camp, Kale was waiting, his scanner in hand. What happened out there? The signal spiked, then dropped off entirely. We found the source, Ilara said. It's some kind of structure, definitely alien, but it activated while we were there. Kale's eyes widened. Activated? Did it respond to anything you did? No, Tyrol said. It seemed to react to our presence. But we didn't touch anything that could have set it off. Kale frowned, staring at the readings. This might mean it's scanning the environment. If it's truly alien, it could be trying to determine if we're a threat or something else entirely. Ilara nodded. That's why we need to proceed carefully. We'll continue to monitor it, but we won't approach again until we have a better understanding of what we're dealing with. Lia stood silently for a moment before speaking. If that thing is waking up, it might draw more attention. We need to be ready for what comes next. Ilara placed a hand on her shoulder. We will be. And with your help, we'll figure out the truth behind this. Tyrol looked at the group, his voice steady. One thing's for sure. This planet's full of surprises. And we've just started to scratch the surface. As the crew settled in for the evening, Ilara glanced at Tyrol, who gave her a reassuring nod. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, one step at a time.